So, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here. Madam Secretary General, Madam Ambassador of Mexico, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to welcome you very warmly for this event this morning, where we'll have the pleasure, first of all, to listen to some of the signatories of the 2050 Today Charter, and after all, to explain to you what it's about and how we can work together to really reduce CO2 emissions here in International Geneva. But first of all, I would like to extend my very sincere thanks to our host today, the World Meteorological Organization, and in particular to Professor Celeste Saulo, the Secretary General. It's very important for us to be here because somehow is the core of whatever we do starts here with the measures that the WMO and the IPCC is providing us. If I may say, they give us the reality. Sometimes it's not the best news we can have in the morning, but unfortunately it's what is happening. And our hope is really to be able to translate it into concrete actions, because if we just take note of the report and think, wow, just an additional one, at the end of the day, it will be pretty difficult for all of us on this planet. So it's important to translate it in concrete action, and somehow the 2050 Today Charter is a way to translate it into action. I would like also especially to thank Ambassador Francisca Mendes, one of the signatories of the Charter, for being here with us today, and she will share a few thoughts on why her mission decided to be part of it. I thank also the Permanent Mission of Switzerland, with which we have organized this meeting this morning. And of course, we appreciate very much the great support of the Geneva Environmental Network, represented here by its coordinator, Diana Rizzolio. And finally, I would like also to thank the 2050 Today members and signatories that are here this morning. Some are online, some are in the room, and they will be able also to share with you at some point some reflection while they are part of it. So this morning we have an agenda that is composed somehow in three parts. The first one, we will be glad to display our unity, because precisely the motto of 2050 Today is united for zero emissions. We are convinced that if we are united, if we work together, if we have a real strong willingness to change the way we do, we will make the difference. If we go on everyone on its own, focusing on its own interest, I think the battle will be more and more difficult. Afterwards, we will have the pleasure to explain to you what the 2050 Today Charter, what it consists of, what's the meaning, and how you can be part of it, how you can adopt it and sign it. And finally, we will answer all your questions. This will be your contribution, because at the end of this meeting, you will have to decide whether you are part of it. And so we'll be very glad to provide you all the elements so you can have a better way to decide and to, we hope, to adopt the 2050 Today Charter. Now it's my privilege and honor to give the floor to our host, Professor Celeste Saulo. We'll be very glad to listen to you. Please, Madam.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. Raymond, you are the executive director of this initiative, and I really appreciate having you all here. Thank you, Francisca. My pleasure. Bienvenida a esta casa. And well, thank you also, Diana, for coordinating this big group of Geneva Environment Network. And we are really very happy to welcome the 2050 Today initiative and honored to host this meeting at WMO headquarters. We are very fortunate to be here in this amazing building opposite to the lush of botanical gardens, next to the lake, and in the wonderful city of Geneva. WMO is a proud signatory of the 2050 Charter and is fully committed to being part of the journey towards climate neutrality and environmental sustainability. The climate crisis is defining the challenge of our time and something I care passionately about. There is a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a sustainable future. Without urgent action, we will miss the 1.5 degrees Celsius target of the Paris Agreement. To achieve this, CO2 emissions from human activities must decline by about 45% from 2010 levels to 2030 and reach net zero around 2050. The long lifetime of CO2 in the atmosphere means that concentrations will remain high even if emissions decline. Our actions today will have impacts for many future generations. Far-reaching transitions in energy, land, transport systems, in urban planning and buildings are essential. For example, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Working Group 3 report on mitigation of climate change states that between 1990 and 2019, global CO2 emissions from buildings increased by 50%. Only few years, and the increase was about 50%. This is due to a combination of direct emissions from heat as well as from cement and steel production. The good news is that nearly zero energy buildings or low energy buildings are possible in all climate zones, and they are possible both for new and retrofitted buildings, according to the IPCC. WMO started its long journey towards climate neutrality in 1990. Our wonderful WMO headquarters was built 23 years ago. It was heralded for both its groundbreaking architectural design and its energy efficiency. We are currently going through a new process of rejuvenation and modernization in accordance with today's technology and needs. WMO is in the process of connecting to GENILAC network. This is a 100% renewable thermal solution which allows us to heat and cool the building with water from Lake Leman using state-of-the-art heat pumps. In addition, photovoltaic panels will be installed on the roof. This will allow us to produce up to 6% of our electrical annual consumption. We are also replacing and upgrading the building management system to enable a more controlled and comfortable work environment. This modernization will speed the WMO transition to geothermal energy and renewable electricity sources for our heating, ventilation, and cooling needs. Our aim, also embedded in our strategic plan, is reducing energy consumption by 20 to 30% by 2027. Building management is only part of the transition. As the new Secretary General, I am considering ways of managing air travel. This would reduce our carbon footprint and has cost-saving benefits for our members. Investment in top-notch video conferencing technology has allowed for larger online meeting participation. We are looking at further improvements in this front. WMO total greenhouse gas emissions in 2022 were 2,170 tons of CO2 equivalent, including travel and headquarters activity. This compares to 4,000 609 tons of CO2 equivalent pre-COVID in 2019. So we are doing rather well, but we could do better. WMO is part of the Greening the Blue initiative led by UNEP on greater environmental sustainability in the management of its facilities and operations. WMO has set up the basis for an organizational level environmental management strategy, as well as a net zero plan that will be conceived soon. At an individual level, many of our staff cycle, walk, or use public transport to get to work. The 4-bike racks are evidence of that. The WMO cafeteria has given staff members a free mug to cut the use of disposable mugs and has more vegetarian options. I will encourage closer cooperation with the staff association to go green. WMO is happy to host the 2050 Today event here today. We are committed to best practice and sustainability efforts shared throughout Geneva. We wish you a fruitful and productive meeting ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Secretary General. I'm very pleased that you highlighted how acute is the emergency and the need to do things. And you show also the way by explaining all the measures you have and you are going to implement. But still, as we can see, the zero emission or net zero is still a challenge. So there is a long way to go, and we are pleased to continue together. It's now my pleasure and honor to use the floor, Madam Ambassador of Mexico, please.
Thank you so much, dear Professor Jean-Pierre, dear Secretary General Celeste, Diana, dear colleagues, good morning, everybody. This is a proof that we are trying to use less paper. So maybe I have some difficulties to read on the screen, but well, the idea is to really try not to use paper because it's one of the challenges. And I want to take this opportunity to thank a lot my colleague Maru. She's leading the concrete actions and measures into the mission to try to fulfill the initiative Today 2050, which is not easy. It's about culture, it's about discipline. But I think we have to do this effort because otherwise we don't have any possibility to move on in this planet. So let me begin by congratulating dear Dr. Celeste Saulo on her appointment as the first woman to lead WMO, Secretary General, and wishing you every success. As permanent representative of Mexico and as a gender champion, count with us to promote and mainstream the gender perspective in climate policies and to unite effort to advance the WMO's actions to address the planet's most pressing concerns. Likewise, I would like to express our recognition to Executive Director Professor Jean-Pierre Raymond and your team for your leadership in steering 2050 Today to support the decarbonization of International Geneva, as well as the permanent mission of Switzerland for inviting us to join this initiative back in 2019. A few months ago, we signed the 2050 Today Charter because we are convinced that it contributes to materialize our country's and our personal climate action commitments to sustainable with a sense of solidarity and cooperation through implementing common and customs solutions and benefit from research. It also exemplifies the kind of commitment, science-based tools, and collective support required for climate action to take place, which is why the permanent mission of Mexico was pleased to join the project behind this initiative and signed the 2060 Today Charter today. Since we joined the 2050 Today, the realization of the carbon footprint impact of our daily partners of consumption and, in many cases, misuse of facilities, energy, and office supplies had a significant effect not only at the workplace, but also on our daily lives. Since 2019, the results encourage us to continue developing concrete measures to embrace sustainable policies and behaviors, which no doubt will be strengthened through our upcoming action plan. Since 2019, we have introduced new policies for our events and at our offices. We have a waste management program in place. We promote a sustainable food consumption both in our offices and our events. We are constantly encouraging employers to reduce energy consumption, walk, cycles, use public transport, or even carpool. These actions have brought excellent results and invite us to be more rigorous in reducing our emissions. We have a good practices handbook, which is a contribution of Maru again. And let me tell you, this handbook, it will possibly lead in our action in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in all the offices, because we are like a champion in Geneva. And the idea is to have the same practices in all our missions, embassies, and consulates abroad. So thank you again, Maru, because it requires so much work. So the aim is to promote the participation and enthusiastic involvement of all our colleagues at the mission, so that awareness and change of many of our habits are an important component of our planning to promote more sustainable practices and be aware of the climate crisis and to achieve together a sustainable behavior. We are developing a mobile application to promote these practices while allowing a marketplace to exchange products for reuse or recycling among all the employees in the permanent mission. Mexico conceived its commitment to fighting climate change through the global awareness to transition to sustainable models based on a human rights approach, gender perspective, and respect for future generations, and we gladly contribute to every effort aiming to foster the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Mexico is pleased to voluntarily commit to contribute to the decarbonization of Geneva, while we hope for more to join and continue to enrich the information exchange as well as good practices. We seek to increase the impact of our individual efforts. I finally thank you, Diana Rizzolio, and the Geneva Environment Network for the support in the organization of this important event. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Madam Ambassador, first of all, many thanks for your very kind words. It's really appreciated. And I'm also very impressed by all your vibrant testimony of why it's so important to implement the 2050 Today Charter, basically to make climate action a reality, and all the measures you have implemented at your mission. And you will even show the way with Maru, with these guides that might be used for all Mexican embassies. So once again, congratulations. All my pleasure. I have now the pleasure to give the floor to Diana Rizzolio, the coordinator of the Geneva Environmental Network. And she will once again demonstrate how important it is to be united in this crisis. And she will add also, I know already, a few elements, because unfortunately, The climate crisis is just one of the several ones we are facing. Please, Diana.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. I would like to start by thanking the World Meteorological Organization and 2050 Today for bringing us together to highlight the importance of walking the talk on what we are promoting as policymakers in International Geneva and beyond. I'm delighted to join the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization and the Ambassador of Mexico, and yourself, Jean-Pierre, to this special event which will present the 2050 Today Charter and the opportunities it can provide to stakeholders. And we heard a lot of words like solidarity, enthusiasm, so we look really forward to the discussion. As we are meeting here, the United Nations Environment Assembly, which is the world's highest level decision-making body on the environment, is convening in Nairobi for its 6th session, looking at the effective, inclusive, and sustainable multilateral actions to tackle climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, and addressing the interlinkages of these three planetary environmental crises the world is facing. Other important assemblies are also convening this week, and for those who are in Geneva, you know that next door we have the Human Rights Council convening, the trade communities this week in the United Arab Emirates. And all these negotiations are also addressing, have also environment on their agenda. Indeed, in the face of the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution that we are facing, urgent action is needed at all levels to reverse the trend. As the Secretary General of the United Nations and the head of the United Nations Environment Programme regularly remind us. For this, we have targets defined in agreed international agreements, including the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, which the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization has referred to. And we have also two other important frameworks, the Global Montreal Biodiversity Framework and the Global Framework on Chemicals. And to achieve these, an unprecedented transition is needed, and the implementation of these frameworks will be essential. And what a better place for than International Geneva to really look at the implementation of these frameworks. And I know that some permanent missions have also reinforced their teams to be able to do so. So we are here in Geneva, home of the world's highest concentration of international organizations and diplomatic missions, which, along with the hundreds of non-governmental organizations headquartered in the region, form an exceptional density of global actors, contributing in terms of policy to develop ambitious actions to tackle this planetary crisis. It is important that we also walk the talk of what we are promoting as policies. Though the description of this initiative focuses on reducing emissions and mobilizing climate action of our Geneva institutions, the initiative has, so I'm referring to the 2050 Today initiative, has also developed and now also looks into biodiversity, food, mobility, sustainable procurement, waste management, thus addressing all the three crises I have mentioned. The initiative complements other initiatives that were launched by the United Nations entities and networks of embassies, providing a platform for exchange and raise ambition. And we have heard what the World Meteorological Organization and the Permanent Mission of Mexico are doing. This is why initiatives such as the 2050 Today are important and essential, because we can share what others have practices. So let me mention a few initiatives that are important and relevant in our discussion. The first one, which has already been referred to, is the United Nations Greening the Blue initiative, which supports the United Nations system in the transition towards greater environmental sustainability in the management of its facilities and operations. So under this umbrella, the United Nations agencies in Geneva and around the world are fully engaged to support efforts to reduce their footprint. And this initiative has a coordination team, which is called the Sustainable United Nations Team or Facility, which is based actually here in Geneva. And they initially were set up in Paris and they moved to Geneva because we have here so many institutions where we need to walk the talk. And 5 years ago, under the leadership of the United Nations Secretary General, the UN Chief Executive Board for Coordination endorsed the first strategy for sustainability management in the United Nations system, which demands that the UN walks the talk on sustainability across all its activities and operations, and colleagues in charge of sustainability from all UN institutions meet regularly to prepare the annual Greening the Blue report, summarizing the actions they have taken and results achieved. And this important work, as mentioned, is coordinated by this Sustainable United Nations team. And in Geneva, you have really an important number of colleagues working in various UN institutions that do contribute to this effort. It's also important to mention that some of our United Nations institutions here in Geneva have more than 75 years and are hosted in buildings that don't always benefit from the latest technology. And the efforts and support provided by the host country, Switzerland, who is co-convening this meeting, to renovate or build new infrastructure to fit to new realities needs to be highlighted. Various member states also benefit from initiatives of their own countries. You have various networks of green embassies, which are called differently according to the countries, that do exist, and they allow them also to find innovative solutions to reduce their footprint. And this experience can benefit others when shared through the 2050 Today initiative. So 2050 Today can really help foster the synergies among the various initiatives that are in place. We have seen how other initiatives such as the International Gender Champions have provided a real transition. So for those who are more recently based here in Geneva, it's really an initiative that was launched here in Geneva, who used to be called the Geneva Gender Champions Initiative, that then became international. And for me, it's clear that it's an initiative that has which concrete commitments on gender parity really helped achieving the gender parity in the senior management level of the United Nations institutions. So I will finish that's why it's important to have such initiatives. I will finish by mentioning that I represent International Geneva at the Conseil, so I represent you all at the Conseil du Climat of the Canton of Geneva. And this council made 13 propositions to improve the climate action of the canton, of the region, and welcomes the efforts of all the stakeholders involved. And I conclude here by thanking Mr. Raymond for his commitment and engagement in making us walk the talk. I followed every step of the development of the 2050 Today, and Mr. Raymond's tenacity and resolution have led to the creation of a network of practice, more exchanges, more solidarity, and more action to tackle the triple planetary crisis. Thank you, Jean-Pierre.
Thank you very much, Diana, for your kind and warm words. Indeed, I'm a bit tenacious, but unfortunately, we have no other choice. I mean, we can say, okay, we give up, it's too complicated, but we cannot, because a generation in front of us, we cannot just let them alone and say, we created the worst mess on this planet ever created, but it's up to you to find the solution. We cannot. Later on, I will share with you a few slides and I will highlight somehow our responsibility. So once again, thank you, Diana, for sharing also with us different initiatives that are taking place here in Geneva. We are convinced that all these initiatives are complementary. There is no competition because, unfortunately, tackling the climate crisis, there is no possible competition. The more we do, the better it is. And by far, we don't do enough. So we are very glad that many initiatives are taking place. And thank you also for highlighting the importance of gender balance. I think this morning we are clear demonstrations that gender balance and even more overbalance in favor of women is possible. I'm very, very, very pleased to be so well surrounded, if I may say. So now it's time to start concretely what is about the 2050 Today Charter. I know that unfortunately Professor Saulo and Ambassador Escobar Mendes have to leave us. It doesn't mean that they leave us alone. they will continue to be part of this adventure. And once again, many thanks to both of you. Thank you. Okay, so let's now go for the concrete things. But before I'll introduce to you the 2050 Charter, its content and how it can be implemented, let's try to put some context, because unfortunately this crisis is not coming from nowhere. It has basically a very short history. And if we can start with the first slide. I am in charge. Okay, good. So it has a long history that it will be, as you will see, rather short. But maybe before we go that way, a few words on 2050 today. First of all, why do we call each other 2050 today and not today 2050 and anything else? Because many institutions, more and more, have strategies for 2050 to reduce emissions, if possible, by net zero. I mean, it's the aim and it is what is needed. You heard the Secretary General mentioning the IPCC report. But what is important is not to have the strategy and to aim to be by net zero by 2050. Concretely is what we do today. So to live 2050 today is right now that has to be implemented. That's why we advise to be 2050 today and not just to imagine ourselves in 2050. And now, what is our organization? Basically, it's a coalition of voluntary institutions that have decided to be part of this collective climate action. So we have now 68 institutions being permanent missions, but also international organizations. Most of the UN entities are already a part of it, be it the UNOG, WMO, you just heard it, but also WIPO and so on. And we have also academia, the University of Geneva, the EPFL, but also here's a graduate institute. And we have a lot of civil society entities, be it NGOs or other institutions that are part of this initiative. Now, how is it built? Who is, if I may say, behind it? And here, in fact, it's a partnership that has been created among authorities, Swiss authorities, the Swiss Confederation first, second, the Republic and Canton of Geneva, third, the City of Geneva, University of Geneva, and Industrial Services. Why these 5 institutions have decided to come together to create 2050 today? Basically because all these entities, national or local ones, have a strategy to go by net zero by 2050. But International Geneva somehow is a bit special. First of all, because you concentrate more on international actions and less on local ones. So it was important to create a framework where we can support and help International Geneva to go for this transition. That's why we have created this organization. And it's also to be at your service to help you to implement any kind of measures you would like to do. Because of course, for a number of things, you need the support of the national authorities, for buildings, for example, but also for mobility. You cannot create a tramway on your own, for example. So you need, and we need this partnership. That's why we have created this entity. Now you know a bit more of 2050 today. Let's put some context in our human life on this planet. And you can see on this graph, the history of the planet, as you all know, is pretty, let's say, pretty older than all of us. As you can see, it has 4.5 billion years. But as you can see also on this graph, every line is 500 million years, pretty a long time for a human being. It's going very, very, very slow. It took almost 700 million years to have initial proto-selves. To have selves, it took almost 2 billion years. And as you continue the green line, you see that we arrived pretty late on this planet. In fact, we arrived some 300 years, 1,000 years, not us as we are here, but Homo sapiens as such. And if we measure this amount of time, 300,000 years, compared to the 4.5 billion, you will see that it's extremely limited. If you say, instead of having 4.5 billion, which is pretty complicated to figure out for a human being, let's imagine it's 1 year. When did we arrive, if the history of the planet is 1 year? And you see, we arrived only 30 minutes before midnight, the 31st of December. And now, to make it even more relevant, let's imagine that the history of planet is 24 hours. When did you arrive? And you see, we arrived 5 seconds before midnight. And what is somehow, if I may say, pretty striking, is in these 5 seconds before midnight, we have been able to use 1/3 of the planet's resources. So you can say we are pretty efficient because, I mean, the rest of the species didn't use that much. We are the best one by definition. Okay, so let's see what's the result. Of course, we have a footprint, can be pretty small, like a woman walking in the desert. It can be already larger with the pyramids. It's already a footprint, you will say a beautiful one. We have created also beautiful cities. You say a great achievement. But unfortunately, there is a downside of this exercise, of this creation, of this infrastructure, that we have a footprint of the planet that is not so beautiful. And unfortunately, our mountains in some places are more garbage than anything else. But of course, we don't see it every day. So let's have some figures to really have a clue of how our appetite and how much we use resources. Because all of this, of course, has an influence on climate and on the different crises that Diana mentioned. But let's have a clue of how big is our appetite. For example, if we take our annual extraction menu, you will see it's pretty big. It's for every single human being on this planet. I mean, really, every single being. So it means 8 billion. We extract every year 11 tons of material. So imagine that you have a garden or a balcony and you put it on your balcony. I think you will not see anymore your neighbor. What's about energy menu? Here as well, it's pretty striking. First of all, you see that I mentioned the 300,000 years, but in fact, it's the last 100 and something years. You can see the graph of the primary energy consumption, and you see by far it's fossil fuels. And you see how big and how exponential it has been. And you see also some figures that according to the level of development or the way the country is organized, we have huge differences in energy consumption. So Switzerland in red is already a bit above the world average. But of course, countries like Qatar, they produce a lot of fossil fuels, have a huge energy consumption. And other ones, like Bangladesh, are 10 times less the average. So you see there is also a very big difference in the way we use energy and somehow the differences between the level. Now you might say, okay, but these figures, it's pretty difficult to understand. 33,000 kilowatt hour per capita, what does it mean? So let's stick to reality, to you, me, human being, which kind of energy are we able to produce? And here I would take the example of the world cycling champion who made this experiment using its own strengths, its own muscles to produce energy. And the result is pretty striking because he made a competition against a toaster. You will say, wow, a toaster, very limited device compared to this big champion who is going to win. And unfortunately, the winner is not exactly the champion, but is the toaster. After 1 hour of cycling very, very hard and being completely exhausted, he produced 0.021 kilowatt, and the result is this somehow pretty white toast. So this is to show you that the energy we use is beyond anything in relation to our capacity. So we are, by definition, in overconsumption, and it has been measured that if we had used, as we have done for centuries, somehow the natural forces we have available, being animals, or even worse, human beings. You know that for centuries we have used, unfortunately, slaves to help us. I mean, to help them, because us, I hope it's no longer the case. And it has been measured that for the way we live nowadays, if we had the support of human forces, every single of us, I mean, in industrial countries, will use 400 people. So it means that the way we live, we have somehow the support of 400 people, virtual ones in case of energy, but I don't think it's really sustainable by definition. So now let's continue and see what's the impact of this way of using resources. And unfortunately, the result is not exactly as beautiful as we can imagine, not the beautiful cities or the great pyramids that we think it's beautiful. Unfortunately, the damage is huge. As you can see on this graph, on all what has been measured, being earth surface, oceans, live corals, cover, terrestrial vegetation, and so on, you see all of them, we are all in the red. And from one of the worst one is in terms of vertebrate population size, 2/3, 60% of them are gone. So it means out of 3, 2 are out. I think it's really impressive because somehow the vertebrates and mammals are our brothers, and we made just life impossible for them. And of course, the next one online, unfortunately, it's us. So I think it's important to realize the impact we have had. And you see also that every single minute, 30 football pitches of woodland are gone. So every day, you know that there are more than a few minutes in 24 hours. Let's continue, and you see a global view. And here you see the impact of the human on this planet. The impact is so big that we call it now our era the Anthropocene, because we are the one that really makes the difference. And you see the damage all over the world, all the parts, the lighter they are, the bigger the damage it is. So you see it's really worldwide. Now, as it has been mentioned, climate is unfortunately only one of the different crises we have. It has been measured that basically to have a sustainable life for us, I mean a safe space for humanity, we have 9 boundaries that should not be crossed. And out of the 9, unfortunately, we have already crossed 6 of them, be it for biodiversity, for climate change, for land use, and so on. And if we continue to live that way, the problem is that we just don't have the resources. At current level of consumption, we need almost 2 planets. And in Switzerland, because we are better equipped, you will say beautiful, but unfortunately it's not sustainable at all, because we would need 3 planets. So if we imagine that mankind will have all the same style of the Swiss, unfortunately it doesn't work, because the 2 additional planets are missing. And here, an important element, we represent 0.01% of the biomass on this planet. So if we take consideration how big we are compared to the whole living system on this planet, it's just us. So I think in terms of equal repartition of resources, we can do better. Now, if we stick to carbon emissions, and it is mainly the purpose of 2050 today, you see clearly that 3/4 of our emissions are due to energy. It's pretty obvious with what I mentioned before. And you see as well that these emissions have been exponential. So for centuries, because we didn't use fossil fuels, it was pretty low or almost non-existent, like the other species on this planet. And in the last century and even less, it went really up. What's the result is every single second, and I underline every single second, because of CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions, the ice is melting on this planet, be it in the glacier. You have seen it more than ever last year in summer, but also this winter, be it for the North and South Pole. So every single second, 10 swimming pools, the volume of 10 Olympic swimming pools of ice is gone. So if you wait 1 minute, is the size of Palexpo, where this morning we are also inaugurating the motor show. I have nothing against car, but the size of this building is gone every single minute. So if you imagine and you figure out, it's pretty big. Result, here precisely in this building, the IPCC has measured that we have a carbon budget because unfortunately there is a clear consequence between the emissions we produce and the effect on the average temperature of the planet. And this budget has been measured. And if we want to stick below 1.5 degree, I mean permanently, because it has been exceeded already last year, but it's not permanently. But to avoid to exceed it permanently, we have basically 5 years in front of us. Afterwards, it will be permanent for a long, long time. And the more we go up, the worse it will be. So as you can see, we have not a lot of time in front of us to act. So 2050 somehow is very far away because we have to make the difference in the 5 coming years. So now, after all this news, let's see also a little bit concretely how much do we emit. And we see that we are not equal. Here, it's important because it's per capita consumption. So it doesn't mean if you are in China or if you are here and you measure only the emissions that are produced, it measures all the emissions that are produced by the way we live. So it means that if you consume a lot in Switzerland, it will appear even if it's produced on the other side of the planet. What is not, by the way, the system states are counting the emissions because, as you know, they are nationally based emissions. And you see here, Switzerland is far above the average because the world average is 5 tons. You have some that are a bit or even more high because of the system, I mean, the infrastructures they have. But you see also that countries in Africa or South America are very below the average. So it means that we have a real responsibility because it means that we use the carbon budget twice as quickly as others, so average. So we have, by definition, a duty to act more than the one that emit much, much less. So now that we have somehow circumvented the problem and the challenge, let's go for the solution. Because basically we are here united to make the difference. And here we propose a recipe that is the 2050 Today Charter, and we invite you to adopt it. Why this recipe we consider is a valid one to work? First element is something that is not just an invention by a small secretariat, who might be, but somehow it's your invention. I mean, it has been created by the 2050 Today members, collectively within the working group, and it has been created precisely to be a reference, to improve the visibility, but also to be something that we have in common, that we can share because we have created together. The 2050 Today Charter has already been signed now by 40 institutions. You have heard this morning two of them, but there are another big group of also as a permanent mission or international organizations. And what is also important, it's the 2050 Today Charter doesn't imply any kind of legal or financial obligations. As it has been mentioned, it's purely on a voluntary basis. How is it based? Basically, you are invited when you adopt it or you sign it, is to fulfill 5 principles. And as you will see, these principles are pretty general, and it has been done on purpose. So every single institution, be it small, be it big with a small staff, big infrastructure, or small one, can participate. The first principle that you are invited to fulfill is to measure regularly your footprint. By definition, if you don't measure, you cannot improve. So it's not only important to know where you start, but it's also important to make it public, because the more we are aware globally of our emissions, the better we will be able to reduce them. Second principle is to carry out somehow thorough assessment of where you start on the different sectors that I will mention in a minute, where you can act, be it food, mobility, and so on. So to really make this assessment so you know better what you can do. Third is to define a number of actions, and here I will mention later on how you can define your actions, to create your action plan. It has been mentioned here by the Permanent Mission of Mexico, for example, but all signatories will have an action plan. So third principle is to define an action plan within a limited amount of time, so not by 2050 today, not by 2050, but much earlier. Fourth is to share this action plan with the 2050 Today community and with us, so we can have really this exchange of best practice. And fifth principle is to communicate. Because the more we communicate on what we do, the more we will be able to engage other entities, and the more we will succeed. So, as I mentioned, 2050 Today Charter is really a complete recipe for achieving net zero emissions. So, as a reference, you have these principles. So, by doing so, you join a common framework. Second, you will be able to decide your own contribution, because this territory has set a very ambitious target to reduce emission by 2030 by 60%. So it's pretty big. So you are all invited to bring your own contribution to this target. It doesn't mean that you have to adopt the target, but to be as much as possible in line with this objective. Third element is we have defined jointly the sectors where you are invited to act. So it's energy, it's mobility, it's food, sustainable IT, but also biodiversity, because climate and biodiversity unfortunately go together. So less biodiversity we have, the more we have impact on climate, and vice versa. So we have also to work on this aspect. And finally, on waste management. So these are the sectors where you are invited to focus, to work. You can work on all of them, but if you say, for me, it's a bit difficult to act on all of them, I'm renting facilities, I would prefer to work on food and mobility, you are most welcome. So it's not, once again, an obligation to act on all of them, it's a choice. Another element is that we have set up reporting and timeline. It means that every 3 years, by 2050, 25, 28, and 2030, you will have to report on what you have done, and it's a way to measure also your progress and to compare with others. Once again, it's a collective initiative. And in order to go through this journey, we have also organized the guidelines that are the appendix of the charter, where you have objectives, you have concrete actions that are proposed, and you have also indications on what might be the most efficient. So you have priority levels being from maximum to recommended. So now if we say, okay, but concretely, how does it work? How do you implement this 2050 Today Charter? Where do I start? Where do I go? How long does it take? What's my role? Element number one, phase one, is to measure your emissions. So here you received, for the time being, an Excel sheet. Afterwards, it will be online. But for the time being, it's that way. And you are invited to provide all the data for the different elements, different sectors, be it energy, mobility, purchased equipment, and so on. And you are invited to fill this document so we can afterwards translate it into a carbon footprint. And the footprint, your result, will be seen on a platform that we have created last year. And you have all the details of your emissions. So here, if we take a possible example, you see the total emissions, in that case 152. It means that 2.1 tons per single employee, so it's pretty low compared to the average. And you see also that between the different years, there has been a decrease of emissions. So somehow this one is a good case. And you have also the details of your emissions on this platform, where you can compare from one year to the second one. In yellow, it's the current one, and in blue, the previous year. And you see all the details of your emissions, so you can compare from one year to the other one, starting from the highest level to the lowest, and you can also play with the different components. And what is also important, that you can compare your performance with the rest of the group, I mean with the International Geneva. And so you can see that some, in average, some can do better, some can do less well, and you can also find out why is it the case and ask the best ones how they have done it. So it's a way to measure it. And you have also the possibility to discover your commuting situation, because we measure also commuting, and you see here that the differences between the use of public transportation, thermal car, and so on. So with this tool, you have really all the elements to figure out what is your carbon footprint. This is first phase one. Afterwards, when you have done it, you move to phase two. And the phase two is basically, because now you know your situation, is to define where you would like to act. So as mentioned, you have the different sectors, and you can choose which one. It can be one or several. And you say, okay, fine, I will measure really in detail the situation from where I start, what is the baseline. And here you have the proposal of different objectives, objectives that you can implement, be it for management, because you can organize the management of these specific actions, and you can also work on the different level where you can make an improvement. So here, if we take the case of food, you can improve the sustainability of your products. I mean, sourcing them in a way that is sustainable. You can promote healthy products. You can promote to avoid food waste, and so on. So you have different objectives that has been defined for you. It doesn't mean that you have to follow all of them, but basically it's a guide for you. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel and say, well, okay, now I have my footprint, but I don't know what to know. With the 2050 Today Charter, you will always know what to do. And here you have what we call the assessment tool, where precisely you have the possibility to assess with this tool your initial situation, and you have also the benefit of expertise partners. We have the authorities, as I just mentioned, as the different departments, but we have also somehow the best experts that have been working with us for mobility, for food, sustainable IT, and so on. So by definition, you are never alone in your journey. When you have done so, you move to phase 3, and it's still within 12 months. Don't imagine that it's a long process yet, so you will start to figure out by 2030. No, it should be done within 1 year. You decide what to do. So here you have the working groups that are helping you, where the focal points of every institution are able to meet. And we have divided according to the different sector I mentioned, be it energy, mobility. And so they meet every 6 months. So it's not every week that you have to convene, but every 6 months they meet to evaluate what they are able to do, what's the progress, and possibly what kind of projects they can do together. So these working groups are here also to help you in defining your action plan. And here you can, with this tool, the action plan tool, you can select the actions that you would like to implement. There are more than 300 actions that are listed according to the different sectors. And so you can really figure out what will be your action plan between 25 and 2030. The aim being to be able to report progress. And when you have done phase 3, it starts to be the most interesting or exciting part is really to go for implementation. And here our aim is also to collect different projects that can be put together, be it for buildings, for example, producing more photovoltaic capacities, as it has been mentioned. So we can not only share experiences, but we can create a kind of a solar community here in International Geneva, be it for mobility, or car sharing or carpooling, for example. We can do it together because by definition, the more we are in the same system, the easier it will be. It goes also for food, for biodiversity, and so on. So our aim in implementing this charter is also to develop and to implement concrete projects that can be done all together. So these are the 4 phases. And now, before concluding, I would like to give you concrete examples of the emissions, because basically emissions, it's not a fatality, it's a choice. We can decide where to emit. It's not an obligation to emit. So if we take the case of Geneva-London return by plane, and you see it's 1,500 kilometers by air, 2,000 by land, and you will see there are quite big differences in the way you go to London, and also what you can do if you decide you will not go to London, you will meet online. So here we have a tool that it's, for the time being, it's in French. It's a CO2 impact calculator. And you see that if we take this example, going back and forth to London by plane is more or less 400 kilo of CO2 emitted. So you see, okay, instead of going by plane, I will go by fast train from Paris to London, and also from Geneva to Paris. And I will use TGV. So you see, you can go just 6,000 times back and forth. You make 133,000 kilometers. So it's much bigger than the way you go by plane. So it means that there is a very different impact if you decide to go by train or by plane. Now you say, okay, what's about going by car or electric car? You see also that by electric car, you can go twice, back and forth. So there is also a difference. It means that using all the means, by far, plane is the one that emits most. Now, if you say, okay, I will be online, so what can I do if I save these emissions? But in fact, you can buy 2 computers. I mean, you will emit the same amount by buying 2 computers. The difference with the plane is that at the end of the meeting, you will still be with the computers. The plane is gone. You can also have two screens, and you can also have 2 smartphones if you would like to follow it online. So you see, for the same amount of emissions, you can do other things. And if you say, okay, but instead of doing all this, I would like to have a nice meal. How many meals can I have? And you see, it's pretty impressive. For the same amount of emission, you can go for a vegetarian restaurant almost 800 times. So twice a day for 1 year. You can have meat or chicken for almost 2/3 of the year. And you can have meat, red meat is much less, but once a week. So you see, emissions can be compared to other elements, and you can really decide when and how to emit. Once again, emissions are not a fatality that is imposed on any of us. Now let's conclude before I will give you the floor to listen to you and answer possibly all your questions, but also listen to your proposals and remarks. So if we try to summarize what is about the 2050 Charter, what are the key elements? First of all, we provide you a common framework where you can have a possibility to exchange with others, to benefit from best practice, to have also contacts with the ones that are really active for climate. You are part also of the efforts developed by the local and national authorities. So you are part of your territory. And of course, it's a way also to highlight your climate actions to make it more available for everyone. Second element, we provide through this system a number of tools, be it a way to measure your carbon footprint, but also to report and to keep the figures online for a good time period. You have the assessment tool I mentioned, the action plan tool, and you have also access to an intranet where you can exchange with colleagues and benefit of all the documents that are available. Third element, we provide also some coaching with training exercise organized with experts, be it on mobility, on food, or other elements. You benefit also from the institutional support, be it local authorities, but also from the academia we are working with, be it the APFL or others. And finally, you have also a financial advantage because, first of all, it's with no cost for the time being. No fees are requested. Second, if we work together, we can benefit from better rates because we are a larger coalition. And possibly, as I mentioned, if we are able to develop joint project, we can imagine that we'll receive some seed funding in order to support you. So here is what is about the 2050 Today Charter. I hope that now you have a clear view of what it means, what is implied. As you will see, there is no obligation. It's basically be part of an exercise where we all demonstrate our willingness to change the pattern for the better. So thank you for your attention. And I hope that you are ready to adopt the charter and so we can enlarge the group. Thank you. Thank you. So now the floor is yours. We are here to answer all your questions, remarks, suggestions, and we'll be, of course, pleased to listen to you. If you imagine that it's something feasible. I invite also our participants online to be part of this exercise, to ask their questions, and I will be pleased to answer it. So I see, we'll start, I see a few hands. We'll start with the lady here on the left. Please, madam. If you can introduce yourself and ask your question, please.
Thank you very much for this very, very interesting presentation. My name is Loyola Ranarison-Scheffer, and I am a communications consultant. So I have two questions. The first one is, do you have in place a kind of communication strategy about promoting the charter with the organizations, who would like to publicly say that they are part of this initiative? And second question, within the organizations, who are your focal points? Because when I was looking at all your phases, it's kind of a lot of work to collect the data and then to do the follow-up. So do you have a dedicated person or team within the organization? How does it work? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. So in terms of communications, we have first of all our website, where all the signatories and the members are mentioned. And there it's also, now it's developed precisely by one of our colleagues who is in the room, to highlight also the actions they implement. We use also social network like LinkedIn to promote. And we have also a number of events that we have to precisely promote the action of the members. But of course, every single one is invited to communicate about its own actions and to have really a strategy to make it more known within the community. Concerning the focal points, how does it work? Basically, every single institution that decide to join the charter is invited to identify and to nominate a focal point. So it should be the person where we have the regular contact, but somehow it can also be the head of the green team that you can have in your entity, or at least a way to organize an infrastructure, be it in terms of management with your entity. Of course, doing the different phases I have mentioned needs some work, but precisely climate action will not, unfortunately, be implemented just by thinking about it a little bit in the afternoon. Unfortunately, we have to figure out how we can implement it. So if you compare, for example, for financial measurement, you have always somebody who is in charge of the finance of the institution, and no one, by definition, no one will think about, yes, finance at the end of the day is not that important. By definition, I have a huge bank account, so no problem. No, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And for CO2, precisely is the same. We have a budget, but quite often we don't have the financial director for this carbon budget. And precisely by implementing 2050 today, you will have to organize this financial carbon aspect of your institution. And so the focal points, they meet within the working groups. So you can select which group you will join. You don't have, by definition, to attend all. And twice a year, we have a meeting of all the focal points, where we decide together how it works, how we advance, what are the main elements we would like to tackle during the year. And once a year, we have also what we call a high-level meeting, where all director, ambassadors, or head of institution are invited to take part. And it's precisely when we have signed the charter in December last year, where we had the 40 plus institutions that were represented and signed the charter. So yes, maybe I'll take a few questions together. So I see these two, please, this gentleman, and afterwards you, please.
Hi, yeah, hi. Lucas Welker, Chair of the Sustainability Committee for ISD. I was just, well, communication question came just before me, but I was wondering the scope of the emissions, right? ISD is a Canadian think tank who has colleagues all over the globe, basically, and our main emissions are plane related. So I was wondering, where does the Geneva International go in? Because technically most of our staff is not in Geneva itself, for example. So like, how do you, within this treaty, how do you take this into account? Thank you.
This gentleman here on the right, please.
Great. Thank you very much. My name is Sandeep Sengupta. I'm the Global Policy Lead for Climate Change at IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature. We're based in Gland, just down the road. So I have, first of all, thank you so much for this wonderful initiative. Special thanks to the Swiss government, to WMO, 2050 Charter, and also you, Diana, on behalf of the Geneva Environment Networks. So I have 3 questions. So one is, the first question is, since IUCN, we are a global organization, but we're based in Gland, which is in Canton Vaud. So are the rules same for us, in a sense, vis-a-vis Canton Geneva? The second question is, again, a bit following up from what the previous question alluded to. Since we're a global organization, our headquarters are based in Switzerland, but we have regional offices, 11 regional offices, around 50 country offices around the world. So for an organization of our size and complexity, what part of it would fit into this initiative? And the third question is, this initiative, you rightly focus on measuring, reducing, and reporting. Of course, there will be some emissions that will happen even after you do all this. And so one of the things we wanted to get some more clarity on was on your views on offsetting, because that is quite a complicated question. There are questions around the integrity of various offsetting systems. So what is the best practice in your view that is available on that for actors in International Geneva to contribute to? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will take another question from the lady and I will answer them all. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Anu Olarawaju, and I work with United People Global. I have 2 questions. The first is there a plan to involve the private sector companies, basically those in the manufacturing industries, who are the largest emitters of fossil fuel, for example, Total Energies, etc. So is there a plan to involve them in this initiative, and how can they benefit from this? The second question is, is net zero emissions really possible? What would you say about carbon neutrality in reaching the Paris Agreement and in line with this initiative? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will answer this question, and afterwards, of course, I will give you with great pleasure the floors. So first question on the scope of this initiative. So we are a small unit, and we are Swiss. So as you have heard, we are supported and promoted by the Swiss authorities. So we have decided on purpose, at least in this phase, to concentrate on the local territory. Why so? Because if you say we have a problem in our building, we don't receive the permit to do a number of works. We would like to improve mobility and so on, having less parking space, having cycling line and so on. All these kind of things, we can have a direct influence because we are part of the authorities, and so we can help you. If you say, I would like to do the same in Nairobi or in Abu Dhabi, of course, our influence is pretty limited. We can send an email to the ministry, but beyond that, it's pretty difficult. So that's why we have decided to focus here on the Geneva territory. But as we have seen with a number of organizations, one of them I can mention is DNDi, based on the experiments they have done here, they have decided to measure the whole footprint of the organization according to the same lines. So for any institutions having, by definition, international activities, you can really use the same methodology, and at some point, why not, we can be also of support, at least in terms of measurement of the CO2 footprint, and you can use our system. Now that it's online platform, we have more possibilities to increase the number of footprints that we can have. So for one institution, you might have different footprints according to the different location you have in the world. At the end, you can put everything together. Now it's feasible. Before it was by hand, it was out of out of reach. But here it's really something we can do. And if we take the example of the United Nations, they measure their own footprint with greening the blue for the whole of their activities, and they extract the part for International Geneva. And what is pretty interesting is to compare, because if you compare globally, somehow it's difficult to figure out what are the differences. But if you compare with your neighbor, for example, WIPO comparing with WMO, I mean, it's interesting because you can really compare real things. I mean, the building, the air travel policy you have. Some institutions have an air travel policy that is pretty loose. So if you compare with your neighbor and you see that you emit 10 times more than him, and he's also, or its institution is also organizing conferencing, you can start to discuss. If it's with someone on the other side of the planet, where you have completely different system of work, it's pretty difficult. So I think both can be complementary. Now, if we come to IUCN and the fact that you are involved, it's no problem at all. We have also the International Olympic Committee that is part of 2050 Today. We have also the EPFL. So we have no border. I mean, basically all institutions are welcome. For the scope, I think I answered your question. And now for offsetting. What do we think of offsetting? I mean, here I'm very clear. For me, offsetting is just a way somehow to delay the solution of the problem. Because we consider that we offset, so we have somehow done a good thing. In terms of intellectual démarche, somehow is not that bad, because you say, okay, I do something bad, a damage, so I try to compensate by something good. The first problem is that the way you try to compensate, because you can not really compensate, emissions are gone, so you cannot take them back. It's not really 100% convincing the way it is implemented, because quite often you have to use a structure that is quite far away, because if you say, okay, I'll do it locally, it's much more expensive. So quite often institutions tend to go for something that is less expensive. And there, quite often you have no control. For example, planting trees, are you going to be there in 30 years to make sure that the tree you have planted is still in place and still absorbing CO2? By definition, it's impossible. Second, you can also have the benefit of things that don't happen. So for example, if you protect forest, it's accounted like offsetting, but in reality, you haven't done anything because the forest still would be there with or without you, and you didn't absorb any kind of additional CO2 because the forest was there. So offsetting should be really the last resort. But if you have means available, our advice is to make concrete contribution to real reduction of emissions. Or if you are not able to do it because you have some specific arrangements that make it difficult for the time being. For example, if you have using fossil fuels for heating of your building, of course, you cannot just say by tomorrow I will switch. It's a process and it will take basically a few years. But in the meantime, you can say, okay, I have some means, some financial means available. So let's try to make a real contribution. And here we have the case of one of our signatories, Club Diplomatique, who precisely asked the same thing. And we advise them to invest in concrete measures. So they have developed a plan for biodiversity within their own facilities. So the first benefit is that you can control it because it's in front of you every day. Second, you can show it to people that come to visit you. This is my small contribution. It's not any kind of compensation, but at least you do something good on the basis of a much bigger, usually, damage you have done. So our view is really to keep offsetting as a last resort, and on the contrary, to implement concrete projects that can be visible and where you have a real control. And now to your question on private sector, we have not yet invited the private sector. Why? Because on the beginning, we have decided to focus on international organizations that are here in Geneva, member states, international organizations, NGOs, and so on. But of course, it's a possibility that we will invite also multinational that are based here in Geneva and to be part of this exercise. And we had already some contacts, but it's a possibility. It's not at all excluded. And finally, is it possible to go by net zero? Yes, it is possible. Of course, it needs a full transformation. Somehow it's more than a transition, it's a revolution, because as you have seen in the slides I presented to you, we rely so much on fossil fuels. 80% of our energy is coming out of fossil fuels. So we have to change the balance, but it's feasible. If we take a concrete situation where we have experience here in Geneva, during COVID time, and it was also the reason why you had this beautiful way down for the entity I mentioned, the CO2, we reduced globally by 50% the emission during COVID time here in International Geneva. Why? Because we have decided we had to travel much less and to have different kind of meetings, no way to have beautiful gathering and so on. I don't say it was nice, let's do it for the next 50 years, it's a way to do it. But it's a way to demonstrate that it's feasible. It's not out of reach. So I'm convinced that if we take the right measures and we are serious about implementing them, we can go by net zero, but we have to be somehow quite tenacious in our way of doing things. Otherwise, of course, it will not happen. So I have another group of questions. Please, Malu.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Just general comments to trying to convince other institutions to join the 2050 Today Charter. So thanks for the presentation. And just to share that in our experience, this has been a very constructive journey. And I can say that from the data collection to the implementation, we have all the support from our executive director, Jean-Pierre, and his team. Data collection is easier than back in 2019, and implementation and how we choose specific actions from the charter depends on your institution in the different habits, activities, and your patterns of consumption, and how your institution develops in the different items from the charter. And finally, we want to invite permanent missions and other institutions to join the charter, and I am available to answer questions, and if you have any doubts on how the permanent mission has been implementing the charter, we are always open to answer any doubt or questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malu, for this testimony. I can assure you that, and you have the living proof that it's feasible. And I would like once again to congratulate and to thank the Permanent Mission of Mexico, because not only they have been very responsive and participative, but they are always the ones that ask for more. What can we do more? And I think it's really important to have great members and signatories like you. And thank you once again for sharing your enthusiasm. So, Madam, and I'll take your question and yours as well.
Is my microphone, yeah, working? Hello, my name is Jessica, and that was a great presentation, thank you. My question is related because I've got experience in other frameworks, so the UN frameworks where Sports for Climate Action, for example, they're bringing together organizations but distributed globally. So your benefit, I suppose, is the local area. So in terms of scopes 1, 2, and 3 of the emissions, in your carbon calculator, obviously I'm assuming scope 3 is calculated, is there a plan to help, obviously, organizations and then, let's use the word, like, green the supply chain in the local area? Because to an extent, organizations will start using all the same suppliers if they that have reduced emissions, that are taking climate action, that are performing better. So ultimately, there's a kind of top-down incentive for the supply chain to also improve. Have you seen that to date, or is it too early to coordinate that kind of initiative throughout the supply chain?
Thank you. Sir, here on the right.
Yes, Boris Engelson. I am a journalist freelance and accredited with the United Nations by inadvertence. I'm sorry that I have 2-minute challenges to what I heard so far. At the onset, we heard that paperless is part of the solution. But is wood a fossil or is it renewable? Is still open. You even alluded to it. Wood can be renewable stuff and energy. And I take this example because it applies to so many things that most of the figure and comparison we make in this field are very questionable. Another one is about energy consumption. If the #1 cause of CO2 is heating, domestic heating in rich countries, of course, it makes little sense to compare warm countries and cold countries, don't you think so? And the third question is more a question I ask to myself. In the past, the major challenges, even environmental ones, of mankind were fixed or managed. Drought was managed, was more or less fixed with adverse side effect, of course, by irrigation. Communicable disease of the 19th century were fixed. The smog issue was fixed. Plane crashes were fixed. Even to some extent, earthquakes were managed. But there is something which is so hard to manage in climate. So I don't want to be negative, but we all know that the underlying issue is demography and consumption society. So can we really go forth pretending that these are not the two underlying issues and that we will fix the issue as easily as we fixed the smog issue in London in the 19th and early 20th century?
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Yeah, it works. So my name is Michael de Souza. I support organizations in mitigating their carbon footprint. Actually, I have 2 questions for you. One is slightly linked to the question of communication, and its term also, it's linked to maintaining the quality of the charter. What happens if an organization signs the charter and somehow doesn't reach their goals? You said there's no way to enforce it. Is there a way to exclude people? Or before that, is there a way to support them in reaching their, you mentioned voluntary elements that people can put in place, but is there a way to support them in making sure they reach their targets? And in case they still don't reach them, is there a way to exclude them for the charter? And the second question is linked to what you mentioned about having, you mentioned having a financial director for the carbon budget. What are the thoughts and what are the feasibility to make sure that organizations have access to funds? Because there's an issue of having funds, even to pay the green team or to pay the green team director, to pay the elements put in place. You said that there's no cost to join the charter, but there's cost in doing all that assessment, and potentially there's seed costs that are needed in order to make the changes. So these are really the 2 questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all these questions. So the first one, what is the framework and the different scope? So we have decided in 2050 today to be in line with reality. It means that we have to measure all emissions that we are somehow responsible for, or at least where we have an influence. Some other initiatives, like Greening the Blue, have not decided to go that way because they have realized that it might be a bit complicated to implement it. So for us, it's not a problem at all. So we invite all organizations to follow as much as possible the methodology we propose. But if it's not possible for some reason at this point, it's not that they are excluded. For example, UN organizations, some measure the scope 3, the procurement, and some don't. So at the end, they see their carbon footprint and they see what is measured, and they can also compare with others, and they can see, of course, a big part is missing. So at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide if you want to have the full reality or if you'd like to have just a partial one. What we have seen is that progressively institutions report more and more, precisely because they see that part of the footprint is missing. So, for example, commuting was not measured for a big number of entities. And last year, a number of them participated, and so they figure out also what's a part of commuting. So we are convinced that the more you do, the better it is, but it's better to start with something than doing nothing, saying it's just too complicated. So supply chain, of course, and procurement should be included. For the time being, there is no common policy. We have not even tried to figure out how it can be because we know it's just a non-starter, it's too complicated with the different rules and regulation for procurement. But basically, we encourage everyone to stick to the most accurate way of measuring things and to provide data. But you can start with the limited ones and go further with a complete vision of your footprint. For the second question, I think here it's an important question, and I'm very pleased that you raised it. First of all, the fact the ambassador of Mexico mentioned paper, saying not using paper is good, I think basically is true, because by definition, the more you use elements, the more you need energy, you need resources to produce it. Of course, paper is just an example among many, but it's by definition not the one that will make the difference. If you take one book, is more or less 1 kilo. If you take one car, is 15 tons. So of course, there is a big difference between the two. But I mean, to be aware of everything we use has an impact, I think basically is really good, because you start to think of your impact on this planet. Second, you mentioned that what's the point to compare heating if cold countries, warm countries? I mean, warm countries, they have the other problem. They need cooling. For cold countries, we need heating, less and less, as you can see this year. I mean, heating is not as much as a must as it used to be, but basically we have the same problem. So in summer, our country, Switzerland, will be warmer, so we'll need cooling. So the problem is the same everywhere. And now you mentioned also demography, saying basically the problem is demography. Of course, we can think we are too many on this planet, 8 billion, if we divide the resources, by definition I have mentioned, are not enough. But if we think not only about us, if we think of our place on the planet among other species, from where do you take the right that we are the only one to use the planet as we please? I mean, why you exclude all the rest? We are 0.01% of the biomass, and we decide we use everything? Fine, you can do it. But this is a recipe for suicide, because we need the rest of the biomass with us, because you cannot eat fossil fuels. No way. So you need vegetation, you need animals, otherwise you cannot live. So to imagine that demography is a problem, by definition, is the wrong way to think, because the problem is the way we consume. I gave you the example of Switzerland. We consume much more than many other countries. So we are not sustainable. We need 3 planets. So if you say, okay, we will reduce the number and we have a limited group and the rest, they should disappear. Even that, it doesn't work. The way we live nowadays is not sustainable by definition. The number doesn't make the difference. It's the system that has to be changed. Very welcome. And finally, the question on the implementation, on the footprint, the support we can provide. And if members are not able to succeed. So here, we are not responsible for the institutions. We are here to help you, to facilitate your work, to provide the good connections, to be together, to be a united force. But at the end of the journey, the only one who is responsible for its emission is the institution itself. So we will not send you the police if you don't implement the charter, but we have a very important tool that will make the difference. Is being part of these initiatives is being transparent with your emissions. So your CO2 footprint will always be available online. So if you improve it, I think it's a really good message. If you don't, and if you don't know why, it's up to you to explain it. So basically, we cannot force you, and it's now not our intention either, but somehow your message, as Gandhi used to say, my life is my message. Here we can say your footprint is your message. And for the second question on funds, we cannot imagine that we will succeed in this transition in thinking that we can do all what we do, continuing business as usual, and in addition to say, okay, we should do something in addition, but we don't have the means, so for climate action and biodiversity. No, we have to think it as the core of everything we do. Because in fact, everything depends on the way if we succeed or if we fail. Any kind of activity on this planet for human beings will depend on Mother Earth. So if the conditions are no longer livable, I mean, all the rest will become completely irrelevant, because you will take care of drought, of floods, of situations that are emergency, and you cannot control anymore. So all what you have done before will no longer be possible. So we really invite everyone to put climate action at its core of its activities, realizing that the consequences of not doing so will jeopardize the whole system. And if we can, as mentioned, we will try to provide some support. We can provide coaching support, tools, and so on. And if possible, also to implement concrete projects, we will be more than happy to provide the means. Yes, I see a number of other questions. I'm, first of all, very pleased of all your questions and all your reaction. And don't hesitate to challenge the initiative, because by definition, this is a united action. And we don't pretend to have the solution for everything, but we try to provide you good answers. Please, sir.
Thank you, very interesting. My name is Andrea Licata, and I have a question regarding innovation and the potential of green innovation. So do you think that smart and green innovation can play a role in your project. I'm thinking, for example, to some green scale-ups, some new materials, some innovation in the space of solar energy. Sometimes these startups, they grow and they become global. And by the way, I'm working to a project to put some of these scale-ups together. So that's why I'm also doing this question. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea. Yes, sir, on the left.
Thank you so much. My name is Amsalu from the Permanent Mission of Ethiopia here in Geneva. First of all, I use this opportunity to thank the organizers of this initiative for this wonderful initiative and for the government of Swiss for the support that you have received so far. Thank you so much. I have a couple of questions. The first question is, how do you evaluate the implementations of the initiatives by each members? It could be member states, it could be permanent missions or any organizations. How could you evaluate the implementations of each initiatives by each member? The second question, is it possible to be member as an individual if individuals like celebrities want to join this initiative? Is it possible for them to be a member? And the third question, what is the specific responsibilities of each member state, especially permanent missions? Because I saw so many permanent missions in Geneva are members of this initiative, and what is the specific requirements that you expect from each member? Because I've also seen from the invitation letter, there is no regular or financial obligations from each member. So what is the specific responsibilities of each member? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for this question. So first one to Andrea, innovation, is it the solution for everything? Yes, and most probably no. Innovation will help all of us to improve, to find new ways of doing things. But unfortunately, we have to take into consideration that we have limited resources. So this is the key, the paramount element to be taken into consideration. It's not possible to imagine that we can have a livable world if we don't change the pattern of consumption. This is unfortunately something we cannot avoid. The resources on this planet are limited. We have no other planet, maybe some things that will go to Mars or to other way to extract, but it will not work. I mean, let's be serious. 8 billion people will not move to Mars to have a new life there. It's just nonsense. So we have to take into consideration that there is a limited amount of resources. And moreover, these resources cannot be renewed, because when we have exhausted them, there is no way to replace them. So innovation should be, in my way, really nature mimic. It means that nature has nothing that is called waste. Whatever is taking place on this planet, except with human activity, it's reused. If you take, for example, whales, the whole process of somehow, if I may say, the recycling of the whale is completely integrated. So the way it is conceived till it disappears completely, everything will be used. I mean, other species will benefit of it, they will eat it, plankton will take it. I mean, there is a whole process. And planet Earth took 4.5 billion years to make this 100% circular system. So we have, with innovation, to take benefit of this wonderful book that is in front of us, that now more and more we are able to read, because for centuries, not to say millennia, we had no clue of how it works. And to take the benefit of these recipes and to implement it for our own. So innovation, if we are able to modelize and use the same system, will be, in that case, the key. But taking into consideration that everything has to be circular. There is no way to have waste, waste, and waste. It doesn't work. So, in one word, we need more sobriety. And coming to the second group of questions, implementation so far. So I can say yes, we have seen good progress among all institutions that are participating. You have heard this morning a number of measures that have been taken. So some have done more, some a little bit less, but this is normal. But first of all, we have raised by far the awareness. Second, every institution has been able to measure its footprint to see what the consequences, and a number of actions have already been taken and implemented with good result for different sectors. Second, is it possible to be part of 2050 Today as an individual? If you're a celebrity? Basically, no. Why? Because it's an institutional work, and we invite institutions to be part of it. But what you can do, if you have, if I may say, a celebrity in your pocket that is very adamant to work for climate action, you can use individual calculator. We have published in November last year, where everyone is invited to measure its own individual carbon footprint for your everyday life activities, excluding work. And if you have celebrities that will be available to do it and to publish it, we will be more than happy to have it. So if you have Roger Federer that will do it, please let us know. And third question, are there specific requirements for participation? As I mentioned, the requirement is to implement the charter, to fulfill the 5 principles I mentioned, and that's it. For the time being, there is no financial obligation. And once again, your participation is up to you. But if you sign the charter, of course, the idea is to implement it. Any other question or remark? Yes, please, madam.
Thank you very much. My name's Victoria Walker. Thank you very, very much for what's been a very passionate and clear presentation. It's a really exciting initiative. And you mentioned earlier on that we cannot have too many initiatives to tackle this problem. But I was wondering how you coordinate, collaborate with actually the other initiatives that are happening across Geneva and further afield. So obviously the more we work together, then the further we will get. That'd be an interesting area to hear a little bit more about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I didn't say we can not have too many initiatives. On the contrary, I said the more initiative we have, the better it is. Because basically the challenge is so big that whoever is doing something is more than welcome. So how do we coordinate? For example, with Greening the Blue, we use basically with UN entities the same methodology to measure carbon footprint. So we use the data they collect specifically for International Geneva. We have somehow the same aim and same goal to reduce emissions. We have been already a bit more detailed because we have developed this charter, but as it has been mentioned earlier by Diana, they have also a master plan to be implemented, to be organized. So most of the UN entities are precisely doing and drafting their master plan for the environment. So it will be available soon. So we see that it's completely complementary. We also work with a Climate Action Accelerator, which is providing also services to some international institutions here, but also abroad. We work by definition also with the canton and the city of Geneva. So all these initiatives somehow are not coordinated, but because it doesn't make sense to try to have a super initiative coordinating everyone. But we try to make sure that, first of all, we work in the same direction, what is precisely the case. And second, we take benefit of different events or trainings and so on that can be made available to publish them more and so to increase our impact. I think that we have more or less exhausted the questions. It's good because we are perfectly on time. So I would like to conclude this event. First of all, by thanking you, all of you, very warmly. Also the ones that are online that didn't ask any question. No, they were very silent. So it means that approve 100%. No, it has been really a great pleasure to have all of you here this morning. Thank you for all your questions, all your remarks, suggestions, and also suggestion. We really hope that this exercise allowed you to have a clear view of what is the 2050 Today Charter, how is it meaningful to you to use it, to be implemented. So I hope that a good number of you will go to the next step and sign it, because basically it's what is intended, to sign the charter and to implement it. So we hope that we will increase the number of institutions that are part of it. So please don't hesitate, or on the contrary, you are required to contact us, because we hope that you will show your interest. If you have additional questions, or if you'd like to have more elements that can be presented to your management of your institution to make the final decision, we are always available. And I really hope that we can increase our community and make International Geneva a real symbol of change and of this needed transition. Thank you once again.